Welcome back to the Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in Iran and the Middle East in the past 24 hours. Iran is preparing a list of conditions for wider traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. That sounds like a procedural step, but it is the clearest diplomatic movement in the last day. Qatar's prime minister pressed Tehran to restore freedom of navigation, and Iranian security official Mohsen Rezaei said the government would draft terms in response. Iran still links a full reopening to sanctions relief, released assets, an end to the U.S. naval blockade, and military restraint. The United States says the international lanes are clear of Iranian mines and roughly 1,500 commercial vessels have crossed safely. It also says it is no longer talking directly with Iran. That leaves Qatar and Oman carrying messages between governments that disagree even about the status of the waterway. Washington describes the strait as open. Tehran describes normal navigation as something the United States must earn through concessions. The opening is real because Iran has agreed to put conditions on paper. The limitation is just as real because both sides still see the current crisis as leverage. A draft can clarify the bargain or become another way to delay. The test is whether Iran's conditions are specific enough for Oman, Qatar, insurers, shipping companies, and U.S. forces to respond to without guessing. Commercial traffic shows why clarity matters. Only 7 commodity vessels were recorded moving through the strait on Thursday, below the recent average. Tracking is incomplete because some ships turn off their transponders. Even so, traffic remains far below normal confidence. Shipowners need more than a mine-clearing announcement. They need recognized insurance, reliable routes, clear fees, and assurance that crossing the waterway will not turn into an accusation of sanctions evasion or a confrontation with armed forces. Iran and Oman have discussed a temporary corridor and a longer-term management arrangement. The United States says those talks do not bind it. That is the central problem. A shipping system only works if the coastal states, naval forces, commercial carriers, and insurers can live with the same rules. Another optimistic statement is less important than a week of sustained two-way traffic under terms nobody tries to overturn. Gulf governments are already planning for a future in which Hormuz never fully returns to its old role. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are expanding ports, pipelines, storage, and connections toward the Red Sea and Arabian Sea. Investors are also examining routes through Syria, Jordan, and Turkey. Qatar and Kuwait have fewer options because geography leaves them deeply exposed to the strait. These projects are expensive and will take years. The strategic logic has still changed. Redundancy is no longer a backup plan. It is a sovereignty requirement. Even if diplomacy reopens the strait, the war may permanently push energy and logistics investment toward other corridors. That reduces Iran's leverage over time and creates new hubs, winners, and security problems outside the Gulf. Washington is betting that economic pressure can move faster than those infrastructure projects. President Trump says the United States is focused on Operation Economic Outcast instead of direct talks. Treasury officials have threatened secondary sanctions against banks, companies, and governments that keep Iran connected to trade and finance. The harshest penalties have not all been applied, but the threat itself can change behavior as firms reduce exposure before a deadline arrives. Iran is feeling real pressure. Oil exports are constrained, and fuel shortages are creating lines and closures. Decision-makers still appear unwilling to soften their central demands. Pressure can reduce an opponent's options while strengthening officials who say compromise only invites the next demand. There is also a leadership problem. Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei remains publicly unseen 6 months after he was reportedly wounded. Officials say he still makes final decisions, but no recent photograph, video, or audio confirms that account. Every negotiating signal, therefore, carries a question about who holds effective authority. Pakistan has now highlighted the coalition problem. Its foreign ministry says Islamabad will continue lawful trade with Iran and does not consider itself bound by unilateral sanctions that lack United Nations authority. China has made a similar legal argument. Governments can support local currency payments, alternative banks, and political resistance even when major companies remain afraid of losing access to the dollar system. Secondary sanctions work best when everyone believes Washington will enforce them against important partners. That creates a difficult choice. Penalizing Pakistan or Chinese entities could impose real costs on Iran, but it could also damage relationships Washington needs for other security problems. If the United States exempts too many partners, the campaign becomes a warning with holes. Enforcement decisions will tell us whether economic outcast is a global architecture or mostly a strong signal. 6 months of war have already shifted regional relationships without producing a stable political outcome. Iran's government remains in place. Hormuz remains leverage. Gulf states are questioning how much outside security guarantees protect them when a major war arrives. Saudi Arabia has explored closer defense cooperation with Turkey and Pakistan. Israel has won operational victories while facing deeper diplomatic isolation and a harder path to normalization. The United States has spent tens of billions of dollars and strained selected munitions stocks before moving more of the campaign into sanctions. Iran has absorbed military and economic damage and growing domestic fuel pressure. Both sides can point to achievements. Neither side has converted those achievements into a settlement or even a shared definition of what victory would look like. The economic map is also splitting in two directions. Dubai's airport reported a sharp decline in second quarter traffic because the war disrupted routes and scared travelers. At the same time, Syria completed its first international card transactions after Washington removed the country from the state sponsor list. President Ahmed al-Sharaa used a card in Damascus, turning an ordinary purchase into a symbol of financial return. That contrast is striking. War is forcing wealthy Gulf states to spend billions building backup infrastructure. A political decision allowed a previously isolated economy to reconnect with global payments almost overnight. Full Syrian reintegration will still depend on compliance, banks, cybersecurity, and governance. But the first transaction shows how fast a door can open when the legal barrier changes. Iran's acting defense minister is telling domestic audiences that endurance has already changed the regional balance. He says distant powers can no longer threaten Iran and collect the benefits from across the oceans. That is not a neutral measurement of power. It is the regime's preferred interpretation of survival. If the state remains intact, then resistance worked. If sanctions continue, they are another phase of war. If talks happen, they must begin with respect. The bottom line is that diplomacy has produced a document-shaped opening, but the regional system is still preparing for failure. Watch Iran's written conditions, sustained vessel traffic, the first real secondary sanctions enforcement cases, and new Gulf infrastructure commitments. Those indicators will show whether the Middle East is moving toward a managed passage through Hormuz or toward a permanently rerouted regional economy. Thanks for listening. The headlines will keep coming, so we'll keep sorting signal from noise. Find the daily written brief at restrictedhandling.substack.com, and we'll be back with more tomorrow.